Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24. This video I'm going to take a look at the game between Peter Svidler and Markus Ragger, played in the German Bundesliga. German Bundesliga is arguably the strongest team competition in the world, and it has been dominated by the team Peter Svidler plays for, and I also play for, the OSG Baden-Baden. They won the title, we won the title the last 9 years in a row, and it does look good for Baden-Baden to make it 10 years in a row in 2015. This game is from round number 13. After that, there's 2 more rounds, 14 and 15. Baden-Baden is 2 points ahead of their closest competitors, Werder Bremen. This is kind of a key match because Baden-Baden is facing Solingen, that is another very strong team, always up there. And it had to be won to keep the lead over Werder Bremen and to get to the title. And that's one big reason why Peter Svidler is playing. He's not playing that often, but this match was a very serious one. This weekend was a very serious one. The round before, Baden-Baden also faced a strong team. So Peter Svidler was brought to play the game on the top board, and he's facing Markus Ragger, the top Austrian player, rated 2.658. Very solid player, very strong theoretician. And that's the game we're going to have a look at. Svidler goes 1 e4, his main move. Ragger goes e5. Very classical player, Markus Ragger. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. And like most world top players nowadays, he goes for the move knight to f6, the Berlin Wall, which has been quite a nuisance for white e4 players for a long time now. Svidler doesn't fancy going for the main line, the ending after castles, and plays the move d3, which nowadays really is just as popular as castles, so-called anti-Berlin, just keeping the game a bit more fluid and more pieces on the board. Bishop c5 is the main move here. White goes c3, black castles, white castles, black goes d6. Svidler always a friend of this setup d3 against the Ruy Lopez, and c3 in many lines did a video series on 6d3 in the Ruy Lopez. That's after a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, d3, where themes are a bit different than in these Berlin positions we get on the board. One big difference is that there's already a6, bishop to a4 included in those, so black can often go b5 and kind of rid himself of this constant white option of bishop takes c6. Now the difference, of course, is the bishop is on c5 here, which black normally doesn't get in those mainline Ruy Lopez's with a6 because the bishop already went to e7. So d6, knight bd2, this is one big tabia, I believe is the word, that has been heavily disputed over the last couple of years. In order to explain Ragger's next move, knight to e7, I have to go on a small theory lecture. Knight e7 used to be considered a little dubious because it allows white to go d4 and build a full pawn center. We'll see in the game what happens there. So black players used to play the move a6 here. That was the main line, not being too afraid of bishop takes c6, and white normally went bishop a4. After b5, black seemed to be doing kind of alright. However, after bishop takes c6, it has turned out that this position is not so easy for black. B takes c. White used to try d4 here all the time, but then black was kind of holding his own. But they started coming up with a slower plan of playing h3, rook e1, knight f1, and it turns out that it's quite unpleasant for black. If you remember the World Championship match, Magnus Carlsen against Vishy Anand, Magnus Carlsen in a very similar position, almost identical, after castles d6, rook e1, castles. He even went bishop takes c6 without waiting for black to play a6. Play bishop c6 here, b takes c. Even though this is probably not a wide advantage, the fact that Carlsen plays this position without having the extra tempo and black having played a6 already shows that this idea is to be respected. That's why black players stopped going for a6. Bishop b6 was played a bit, but that allows white to go knight c4, grab this bishop, when at least he gets the 2 bishops. So they started looking at the move knight e7 and concluded things aren't too bad after d4, e takes d, c takes d, bishop b6. It's true that white managed to build this full pawn center, e4 and d4, but it turns out that black has quite some resources of his own. One big idea is often to go d5, force white to go e5, and then with this fixed center, the black pieces are quite well positioned to fight against it. Another problem for white is that his pieces aren't, excuse me, aren't well organized to maintain the pawn center yet. Normally, if you would get in rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, h3, white would be seriously better, but he's quite far away from it. So there is room for discussion here, and over the last couple of games, black has been doing all right. Svidler plays rook e1, which is the best move, but it allows black to go bishop g4 and pin the knight. If you stop that by playing h3, the problem is that now black goes d5, e5, and his knight has access to the e4 square, which is normally good news in these structures, and here black seems to be doing perfectly fine. Ideas like c5, putting the bishop on f5, not much there for white. So rook e1 directed against knight e4 is better, but allows the pin bishop g4, h3, bishop h5. We're still following various top-level games. One of them played by Svidler himself against Sergei Karyakin. They keep following this game. Queen b3 is the move played in order to unpin, get out of this diagonal, stop any funky bishop takes d4 ideas. And now black is doing what was his plan all along, fix the structure in the center. Go d5, white has to go e5. Even though this knight can't go to e4, black's saying, okay, I'll go knight d7, no big deal. My bishop is doing very well here. I'm planning to play c5, and the white pieces are still a little bit uncoordinated. Still, white has a space advantage, and this is not by coincidence that the theoretical discussions are happening here. This is very much cutting-edge theory and the big line of the anti-Berlin nowadays. a4 is the move white plays here. He would like to go knight f1, but he can't yet because this bishop is keeping his eye on d4. So white tries to bother this bishop and try to provoke some concessions from black on the queen side. Normally black was going along with white's wishes here and was playing the move a5, which is a concession, because then after c5, for example, white could now win a piece with bishop takes d7 and queen takes b6. Also long term, having the pawn on a5 might slightly weaken the b5 square if black ever gets in. c5 would be a bit inconvenient, and it restricts his own bishop a little bit, can't go to a5 anymore. So a5 has been played here by both Karyakin and Peter Leko, which goes to show that it is a very serious move, since these guys are very strong theoreticians. But it's not ideal, and Ragger tries to play in what I consider a more principled manner by playing the move a6. White bishop has to retreat, it goes to d3, that's the most active square, but it's also initiating very concrete play, because after bishop d3, black can and does go c5, when now white can't take it, because after knight takes c5, this bishop on d3 would fall, and that's bad news for white. So you have to do something in order to stop the double black threat of c takes d4 and c4. Of course, Svidler, well, not of course, but Svidler was very ready for this turn of events. The move a6 did not take him by surprise, and he kept making his moves very quickly. Started with the move g4, attacking this bishop, but allowing black to counterattack with c4. That's what happened in the game, after which it becomes extremely sharp. One valid question is, could black just have gone bishop to g6, not going for the insane complications that follow? I've had a brief look, and it looks like to me like he could have, but it does look pretty scary, especially over the board if you're not prepared for this. After bishop takes g6, h takes g is forced because knight takes g6, lose the pawn on d5. So you have to go hg, and here white has a couple of options that look very scary. Knight g5, for example, threatening e6, planning to go queen g3, queen h4, queen h7, checkmate as well. And it seems to me like black is surviving here. Computer says knight to c6, and then e6 with crazy complications. This guy is hanging e6, and it's all a mess. But it's not something that is easily acceptable for black, so I'm curious if we're going to get more theoretical battles. Maybe in this position e6 is another move that leads to a very sharp game. But Ragger went for the move that is even more principled, the move c4. Double attack does not win a piece. White could go queen to c3 since bishop on h5 is also hanging, but after queen c3 it turns out that black is doing alright. He just takes on d3, bh, rook to c8, queen takes d3. Now white is a pawn up even, but after knight to c6, black pieces are coordinating very nicely. Knight b4 is a very unpleasant threat. White king has been slightly weakened, and this position seems to be totally fine for black. Certainly wasn't Peter Svidler's intention, who banged out the move bishop takes c4. I'm sure he didn't bang it out, but he played it pretty much instantly, showing that he had anticipated all this stuff and that he had analyzed it, which is normally not a fun feeling. If you're having a position like that over the board, Ragger had already taken time here, and it's clear that it's going to be very sharp and very complicated, and your opponent is making moves instantly. But let's see what Svidler's idea is, because for now he's a piece down against only 2 pawns. Those are nice pawns though, controlling a lot of ground in the center, but white still has to act very actively in order to justify what he just did. It starts with bishop to g5, threatening to win back the piece with bishop takes e7 and knight takes b6. Black can't stop that threat by going rook to e8, since then white has knight to d6, which is a theme we will see plenty later on in the game. Very, very powerful knight, just winning material here by creating multiple threats. So the only way for black to stick around is to, remove this bishop from b6, parrying that threat. And the best square is the a7 square. Bishop c7 is just a little passive. This bishop, well, doesn't have a very nice view from a7. It's keeping an eye on the d4 pawn from c7 is not doing much. And here it turns out that white is so active he can proceed slowly, play knight h4, and maintains an advantage even without winning any material back quickly. All of this was surely known to Peter Svidler. I've talked to him briefly and he said, yeah, it was all preparation up until a certain point where we'll get to soon. That's often the problem if you're the opponent running into preparation as well. You make the best move, bishop a7, but that means your opponent has checked this with his computer at home, and that's what happened in the game. Queen a3 was played once again quickly, attacking the e7 knight yet again. Same idea as before, rook e8 doesn't work because of knight to d6. So the only move to keep his material here is the move f6. E takes f, g takes f. That's a significant transformation, because now it's not so much white having positional compensation with his strong pawn center anymore. Now it's just hand-to-hand combat tactics. White goes bishop h6, attacks the rook on f8, attacks the knight on e7, and the position is a total mess. Materially speaking, black is fine even if white manages to take on f8, but there is also the factor of the weakened black king, so the play has become extremely concrete. As usual, well, I'm not sure if as usual, but as before, rook e8 is not a good idea because of knight d6. Same thing for knight f7, rook f7, which runs into knight d6 as well. So what black has to do is remove this knight from e7. That's what Ragger does, but here he errs and chooses the wrong square. He goes to d5, looks perfectly natural, but it is, I'm not sure, it's just not the best move. And the main reason is that it's not concrete enough. I keep saying that, I'm not sure if that makes any sense. The main reason is it doesn't work, and you're in computer analysis territory here. The move he had to go for was the move knight to c6 instead, playing a bit more actively, keeping an eye on this d4 pawn and stopping white from getting the kind of grip he gets in the game. Svidler said that much, that knight c6 was a better option for black, and that, well, it was preparation, but preparation for one game. And that's quite often what happens nowadays. You play a very sharp line, check it with a computer, and if your opponent finds everything or knows everything, you want to have kind of a safety net in that you're not lost there, but you're willing to live with objectively not being better if it gives you enough practical chances along the way. That's what happened here. After knight c6, position is completely unclear. White has a couple of very interesting options. Knight d6, once again one of them, or even the quiet move rook a d1 leads to a total mess. But it seems like black is holding his own here. For example, knight to b6, knight jumps into d6, let's say queen to c7. I'm reading out computer lines here, you won't be surprised. Bishop takes f8, rook takes f8. Now the material balance has stabilized. Black has the two bishops against the white rook and two pawns. It's more or less equal, and the position still remains extremely complicated with the weakened black king, but the potential of black having all these pieces. Knight h4, for example, very logical, planning to go into f5, and I have no idea who's better and why. The computer says it is equal, so if this is the worst case scenario for white, it's an opening idea very well worth trying, and that's what Peter Svidler figured out. And he showed us that he had some pretty serious stuff lined up here. He had been waiting for quite a while to get it on the board, and Ragger turned out to be the unlucky recipient of some serious Peter Svidler homework here. So, long speech, why is knight d5 bad is still the question out there. White just goes knight to d6, and it turns out that the white pieces work together so nicely that they manage to overload the black defenses here. Knight takes b7 is now always in the air. There's always queen to b3, pinning this knight. And there is even some lines where white can play slowly. Let's say black goes rook b8, stopping knight takes b7. Now white just plays knight to h4, move we've seen before as well. Just activating the pieces to the max, intending in some lines to go knight f5. And it turns out that black is too passive, too uncoordinated to resist here, which is quite strange. For example, knight 7 to b6. White can keep just slowly improving his position. Rook comes to e2, intending rook a e1. And because of this tremendous octopus knight on d6, really inhibiting the mobility of the black rooks very, very seriously, white is getting away with all this and has a winning position here, believe it or not. Say queen d7, now there's a5. Black just ends up losing material at the end of so many lines because he has too many problems. So instead of rook b8, Ragger tried the move queen to b6. One other move that looks natural is king to h8, just trying to get out of this diagonal where there's always trouble looming. But then white is also in time to bother black very significantly by going queen b3, taking this guy, knight b6, knight takes b7, queen b8. Now is finally the time to cash in, go bishop takes f8. And it turns out that queen takes f8 doesn't work because of a5, winning a piece. These knights have to stay connected to each other. And after queen takes b7, white goes bishop back to h6. Now he has 3 pawns and a rook against 2 pieces, which materially is maybe even a slight advantage, but more importantly the black king keeps being very weak and the black pieces keep being a bit clumsy. So white has an edge here. Still, this might have been the best way for Ragger to stay in the game. Instead he played the move queen to b6, which looks very natural as well, stopping knight takes b7, finally coordinating these rooks. And playing to go queen b4 if necessary to exchange queens, also stopping queen b3. So looks like a perfectly good move, but he still has a problem that the white initiative keeps going and going. a5, asking for queen b4, which is duly played, only move. But Svidler shows here that even without the queens on the board, the white initiative is still extremely strong. I'm not sure if this was still part of his preparation. My best guess is that after queen b6 he had to start using his own head. But his own head is also pretty decent, very, very strong player with the initiative, Peter Svidler. He keeps it here by going rook to e7. We see the 2 white pawns on d4 and a5 doing a great job of restricting the black knight. In the game, rook a d8 was played, but that has the problem that after knight takes b7, the black pieces are kind of all hanging and white is not even material down anymore. But what are you going to do? This knight didn't have a good square. Rook f d8, no better. In fact, it's worse because after rook g7, king h8, knight h4, you're going to get checkmated quite quickly with knight takes g6, and knight f7 checkmate being a very, very serious threat. Knight b8 is a move so ugly you probably don't even consider it. White also keeps an edge here by a variety of ways already. Simplest probably bishop takes f8, knight c6, rook takes b7, rook takes f8, rook c1. White keeps enjoying tremendous coordination, now has a rook and 3 pawns for the 2 pieces with another close to winning advantage. So Ragger tried rook a8, but knight takes b7, I've mentioned before. It's just collecting too much material. Now this rook is a serious thorn in the flesh, and white is threatening both knight takes d8 and bishop takes f8. So black had to try to kick this rook away with knight d5. Doesn't help though, the rook has a pretty good square on the 7th rank, rook g7 check, king h8. That means this bishop never got to take on f8, but it's not necessary. Svidler once again ignores a black rook. He could go knight takes d8 here, which is a perfectly good move. But instead he just activates his remaining passive piece. The a1 rook goes rook c1, and turns out that black is still too busy to save himself. For example, after move bishop e4, which looks natural, now the black back rank is his downfall. Knight takes d8, rook takes d8, rook takes d7, and we see the threat that rook c1 posed. Checkmate on c8, well, on d8 technically. So Svidler had anticipated that, well, black just can't free himself here, and he was right. Ragger tried to move rook to g8, at least exchanging this guy, but now white cashes in. Finally, he decides to take something. He takes on d8, and the game is pretty much over. Rook takes d8, once again the same problem. Rook takes d7 winning. Instead, rook takes g7 was played. Bishop takes, king takes. But here, knight c6 is the finishing touch, because this knight that was dominating the game quietly from d6 made a nice career and went to c6, where it turns out it's winning a whole piece. It's trapping this bishop. We see that the black pieces just never fully managed to coordinate. They were there and not even on such bad squares all the time, but there was never time to kind of get one to tempi, get the pieces going to protect their king, protect each other. That's why the game went the way it went. Very nice homework by Peter Svidler, because I should mention that probably. Markus Ragger resigned after knight c6. The bishop on a7 is gone, so he saw no reason to continue. One line. He could try his bishop e4, just knight to d2, knight f4, trying to keep some material by getting in this fork. The problem is some pawns have been collected by white along the way. This pure knight endgame would leave white 3 pawns up, so nothing you have to continue against Mr. Svidler. What was I saying? Very nice homework by Peter Svidler, whom we're not used to getting in these huge theoretical blows, but here he had something very nasty lined up, and Markus Ragger fell victim to it. The theoretical question in the future will be if this line is good for white, or if it was, as Svidler suggested, humble as he is, more of a one-game try and black can hold himself. Sorry, just clicking through the moves here, getting to the critical position by going knight to c6 instead of knight to d5. I haven't checked it enough to reach a final answer. Time will tell, but certainly new developments in the anti-Berlin Wall theory and some hope for white players. Oh, I should mention for completeness sake also that Baden-Baden managed to win that match, keep the lead over the rivals from Werder Bremen, and with 2 rounds to go, here we got the scores. Oops, sorry. There we had the scores. Here we go again. Not sure this is very visible. Baden-Baden 25 points, Werder Bremen 23 points. There's 2 rounds to go, so it does look good for making it 10 in a row for Baden-Baden in the German Bundesliga. Peter Svidler did his part contributing, winning this game against Markus Ragger. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Very confusing game, computer chess nowadays. What are you going to do? Thanks guys, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.